finally, the archive would not exist without the support of our members and donors. Attending tonight's event is just one way to support us, and for that, we thank you. Please visit our website to find other ways to join us in our mission. And now, Grendel will introduce tonight's speaker.
Thank you, Angie. Hi, everybody. Welcome and thanks for joining us today. I'm Grendel. And as Angie pointed out, if you have any questions about Type West, you want to be a type designer, you're thinking about it, just talk to me afterwards. So it's my great pleasure to introduce this team of scholars, Ashok Khalsa and Saoirse Byrne. Saoirse is a craftsperson who trained as a fashion designer with a side of sustainability. And she has studied the ancient craft of cordage and has a practice of creating wearable art using these historical techniques. And you can see more of her work at the Museum of Craft and Design, which is just down the street. And Ashok has a background in computational linguistics, which I had to look up, and computer science. And he has worked for several international tech companies, which I will not name, as a software engineer and executive. And he has applied his diverse skills to understanding the Khipu code and has authored and co-authored several papers outlining his discoveries. It is rare that we get a glimpse of an original Khipu outside of Peru, and you will not regret joining us today, although I'm told that things may get quite naughty. I'll show myself out now. Take it away, Ashok and Saoirse.
Thank you so much. For the record, it's only one paper. Maybe next year it'll be seven. So my name is Ashok, like a bloke, named Ashok. And what I'm going to do is the Khipu Kamayak scribes, the people who make khipus, went to Cusco for 4 years to get educated, the Inca capital. We only have 2 hours. So I'm going to be very brief and very short and hopefully very fast. For that I apologize. But it's wonderful to talk to a receptive audience. Saoirse just commented to me that she feels the energy is wonderful. We are grateful for that. All right, let's get started. So this is, let's start with this. This is a khipu. I've forgotten where it comes from. It's obviously from the Inkas. And we'll talk a little bit about how it's built. You'll see there's this big cord, and this khipu is arranged in a fan. That's not how it was originally mounted or created or read. It's arranged in a fan because our Western eyes want to look at every cord and knot. However, the people, the Khipu Kamayak scribes, who actually read and made these khipus, used their fingers to read it, right? And like Braille, they had this ability to feel the cord and tell everything about the cord's fibers, its twist, its knots. A lot of kind of very fine detail could be transmitted through the fingers. We have ethnographic research, for example, that we know of indigenous Andean people who can feel up a cord with hair in it and tell you which relative that hair came from. Wow. So I want you to, as this presentation goes, you're going to see a lot of pictures, but I want you to keep this idea, the sense of touch at your fingertips, so to speak, as we go through that, right? A lot of this is by touch. The cords, as you can see, are hung from a main cord called the primary cord. There's a person here who's a bookbinder who I was talking to. This is the equivalent of a bookbinding. It not only holds all the cords together, but it also gives us some sort of information. We have a member of the team who's studying nothing but those cords as his PhD thesis. It tells us maker's mark, maybe where it comes from as a region. It may even tell us a little bit about the content. Hanging from the cords is, I hate that when that happens. hanging from the cords, you can see here, are groups of colors, right? White, orange, beige, etc. When you have groups of cords all of the same color, we call that a banded group. And I'll get into that in a little bit. Banded groups were discovered by one of our colleagues, Sabina Hyland, out of Edinburgh. Sabina deduced that when you have groups of the same color, it refers to a family known as an IU. We have a Peruvian here in the audience, or two. So these are families. This is a family, this is a family, this is a family, okay? And so this is what we call a census Khipu. Further work by my teammates, Manny Medrano, his full name's Manuel, but we call him Manny, and Mac Fitzpatrick have confirmed a lot of the details about a census Khipu. There is a great decipherer in the 1950s, a British architect named Michael Ventris, who decoded Mycenaean linear B. And he had this saying that all decipherment begins with a tax receipt. This is a tax receipt. So the way that the Incas would tax their subjects, so to speak, is they would conscript their labor for a period of 2 years. And they would send them all over, not just Peru, but the Incan Empire. And so this is likely an account of the people in a village, and in some of the cords, the labor owed and due. Manny and I were the first to discover that these cords, these white cords, had to do with sums. And you'll see that as we go through these, you can see because it's arranged in a fan, that these cords have kind of lines in them, fan-shaped lines. We call those lines registers, and they're the hundreds, the tens, and the ones of this Khipu, okay? And you're gonna learn how to make your own. That's the second half of this class. Altogether, there's about 30 families, 30 groups. If you discount the white cords, there's about 30 bands of color that are not white, so maybe a village of 35 families, okay? This is the Khipu field guide. During the pandemic, like so many things, I was talking to Angie and Grendel about how the pandemic destroyed so much, but it also created so much, like this place right here. And for me, because I'm married to an Andean scholar, during the pandemic, I decided, okay, I'm gonna spend my time fulfilling a lifelong fascination, which is Inca Khipu, and trying my hand at decipherment. So there was an open source database of Khipus that had been digitized, their chords, their knots, their colors, all that kind of information, from Harvard. And so I downloaded that database, and I spent the next year building the computer software to decode this and make these graphics that I could see. And my plan was basically to offer enough value to somebody, some Khipu scholar, that they would take me under their wing and kind of show me the ropes, so to speak. Yeah. Now I get to walk out too. The plan worked better than expected. When I was at Apple, I was a young leader, and because I was such a poor young leader, they offered me an executive coach who was this famous lady. And she said to me one day, she said, how do you build a professional relationship with someone that you don't know? I don't know, give them a gift? No, she said. What you do is you ask them for advice, and 2 weeks later you say, that was really good advice. One of the best lessons of my career. So I chose a young man who was at Harvard, who was a mathematician like myself, Manny Medrano, and I said, Manny, what do you think of this website? Would you give me some advice and critique? And Manny said, let's work together. Better than expected. So it's been 5 years that we've been working together. In that time, we've built up a very team of 8 people, multidisciplinary, very enthusiastic. We're making great progress. And of all the things that I'm most proud of, I'm proud of the team. So let me introduce you to the team really quickly. This is Karen Thompson. She's a mathematician and data scientist from the University of Melbourne in Australia. You'll see that little yellow band at the bottom. That's AS69. That's a schematic rendering of the largest Khipu in our database. It's the width of this room. And for me, it's a monster I don't even, like, I just want to get it right, but I don't even want to look at it. Other than that, Karen has this ability to see the forest for the trees, numerically speaking. And she deduced that the khipu on the bottom restates the values of the top. And how she got that, I have no idea, but she did it. So that was Karen's introduction to the team. The next chap is my colleague Manny Medrano, the young scholar at Harvard. Manny is probably the most famous of our group. While he was a young undergrad at Harvard, he worked on a set of khipus known as the Santa Valley khipus and discovered a lot of really important information about matching a census document, Spanish census document, with this set of khipus. So it wasn't a Rosetta Stone, but it was close. This is Mac Fitzpatrick. Mac was a computer science undergraduate at Harvard, and like so many of us, he fell down the khipu rabbit hole, and now he's getting his PhD. He's been in Lima studying primary chords. You can see that grin on his face. He's pretty happy. You know me, I'm a better than average computer guy and mathematician and linguist. I also have better than average skills in art. I used to be an architect doing churches and homes, and now I do wildlife photography, and I'm a nature guide in Alaska. So anyway, like Karen and so many of us on the team, we both have 1 foot in art and 1 foot in science. It seems to be a common thing amongst decipherers. This is Kylie Quave. Kylie is a professor of anthropology and archaeology at George Washington University and one of the original khipu scholars. And she has digitized more khipus than I can count. Saoirse and I have done a couple. I can tell you it's a real labor of love. We are very grateful to have Kylie on our team. Kylie Brat-D, who is a professor of anthropology at James Madison University, and she brings a political context and awareness of Inca politics and Inca culture for several centuries. She's also a really brilliant scientist, so she asks me a lot of questions that I can't answer. This is William Scannell. Will is the newest member of the team. He's at University of Oxford studying Egyptology, and when he's not studying Roman documents in Egypt, he's studying cordage at the British Museum. And finally, there's Saoirse. Hold your hand up, Saoirse. I'll let Saoirse tell more about herself later, but there's an archaeological concept called chaîne, I'm mispronouncing it horribly, chaîne opératoire, which basically says that in order to understand an artifact archaeologically, you have to understand how it was made, the decisions that the maker made, and how it was used, and sometimes how it was disposed of. So Saoirse is our chaîne opératoire guru. When we can't figure out why a particular chord is the way it is, or why not it came out that way, we go to Saoirse and she tells us. Okay, so this is the team total. I have a friend in the Mendocino area who's a Grammy Award-winning musician, and he always talks to me about the lack of his legacy. But him and people close to me have observed that this team is my legacy, and I'm really proud of them, and I believe that these are the folks that are going to solve the khipu code in this century. Okay? Whoa. All right. Let's not talk about the team. Let's talk about the Incas. Did I get there? So this is the Inca Empire. It went all the way from almost the bottom of Chile to Ecuador, west of the Andes. People don't realize that the Incas were only alive for about 130 years as a civilization, 1400 to 1532. And in that period, roughly in 75 years, they conquered all of that region and became like Rome, basically. They call their country Tawantinsuyu, which is Quechua, the indigenous language of the Andes, which means 4 are together states, so 4 United States, right, 500 years ago. And the states are divided up into Chinchasuyu, which I want you to remember that name if you can. Antisuyu is everything west, i.e. the deep dark jungle. The Incans weren't happy about having to conquer Antisuyu. That was bad juju. Cuyasuyu and Quintasuyu, which includes Lima. Okay? So those are the 4 states, and you'll hear me use the word Suyu, so maybe that means state, and you'll hear me use the word Tawantuns, which means the empire. The Incas had a predecessor in Quipus, and that was the Wari culture. The Wari culture was from roughly 500 to 1000 AD, and they were the ones who kind of developed the use of khipus for administrative state. You can see this is a really beautiful khipu, right? It's just gorgeous. And you can also tell that because this was an imperial document, that the Wari had to address issues like tampering of the cords or tampering of the knots, and they wanted to make it beautiful. And when I look at a dollar bill, it's like that's all the same kind of stuff in a dollar bill that went into the design of this khipu, right? This khipu has a long cord at the end. This is called the dangle cord. Okay, this means this is the right end of the khipu. So this is a book that was written in the 1500s by a gentleman named Guaman de Pomo de Ayala. I'm not going to repeat that. Guaman was a gifted artist. He wrote this book as a petition to the king. And it was his way of telling the king, hey, these conquistadors are being very unjust. What you can see up here is, those who can speak Spanish can already translate this, but a runner, big and small, and then in Quechua, the indigenous language of the Incas, Hatun, Chasqui, Curaca. So Hatun means big, Chasqui means foot, and Curaca means lord. So this is a Bigfoot lord. And he was a messenger who would run up and down the roads of the Inca Empire sending messages. What do you need to run an empire? Well, amongst other things, you need roads, you need messengers, and you need record keeping, right? So enter the khipu. This is obviously somebody important. He's wearing this kind of sun mace, which is the symbol of the emperor. And he's got a khipu, and he's got a conch. So he's an imperial postman. Yeah, he's also got a pouch, and it's amazing what you can put in that pouch, but if we have time, I'll show you. So this is another plate from Guaman de Pomo's book. The top has been truncated, and this has been colorized by someone who I don't know. On the left is the Inca Emperor Yupanqui. I want you to remember that name if you can, Yupanqui. And you can see that he's got that imperial mace again. And on his skirt, you can see these little squares, maybe, yeah? Those squares are called tokapu, and some people believe that's a pictorial script. Some people believe it's just markers of who you are or where you came from. But it's something we really haven't studied enough yet. On the right is a khipu kamayak, a khipu scribe. And in Quechua it says that this chap, you can see the word suyu, or here it's spelled soyo, suyuyak, of the state. So he's the khipu kamayak, a place called Komachai. And in the back are these storehouses called kolka. You can see that it's been truncated. So he's probably reading the contents of the storehouses to the emperor and telling him what goods are stored in this place. On the right, another plate from Guaman de Pomo, and this it says Contador Mejor y Tesorero. So this is a counter and treasurer of Tawantinsuyu, and then a khipu kamayak. So he's holding in his hand a large khipu. You can see the dangle end, which signifies the end of the khipu. And here you can see a fuzzy ball of yarn known as the kati. Okay? In the bottom right, you see a grid of dots. That's a upana. It comes from the Quechua word upai, meaning to count. So this is a counter, and this is an artist's rendition. They don't actually look like this. But it's a little tray, and it was the equivalent of our abacus or soroban. It was a little tray with coffers, and they would use pebbles, and they'd move pebbles around in these coffers for ones, tens, et cetera, to organize things. Now, you'll notice it's 1, 2, 3, and 5. The Incas used base 10, and that may not come as a surprise or a shock to you, but it should. When Pizarro conquered the Incas, these folks were still using Roman numerals, right? The Spaniards were still using Roman numerals. And so when they saw the upana being used and they were doing their calculations super fast, they couldn't believe it, right? It was just amazing. The Incas were way ahead of their time in many things, and that was one of them. I have to, before I leave this slide, I have to comment. I spent almost all my life drawing figures. He's a practiced artist. I mean, look at the forearm, right? He's even got the muscles in the forearm, and the hands are drawn beautifully. And he's spent a lot of time learning how to draw. Okay, Katie? All right, so let's look at a khipu and try to understand kind of how it's built. This is animation. It's from the animation made by the Museum of Art in Lima. It's kind of like the equivalent of the National Gallery of the Smithsonian in Peru. I call it a Frankenstein khipu because you'll never see a khipu like this. It's just made up to show you body parts. Okay, so you'll notice the first thing is that there's a red ball at the end. That's the kati that I talked about that marks the start of the khipu. Very few of the khipus that we see today have the kati on them. They've been removed or dropped off or separated. But it indicated either the content or the maker's mark. We're not sure. Okay? Then you see the primary chord. And here you see that there's groups of 4 colors. There's a beige and brown chord we call a barber pole, for obvious reasons. And then a white chord, a brown chord, and a beige chord. And they come in groups of 4, right, in this Frankenstein khipu. So those we call seriated groups as opposed to banded groups. And our colleague named John Clendaniel was the first to kind of note statistically that seriated groups had higher values and tended to belong to the state rather than a village or a census. So we have more insight into banded group khipus than we do into seriated group khipus. Okay, so you see 3 groups. The 5th group, you see these 2 brown chords. In this Frankenstein khipu, those are called top chords. And top chords, the khipu that I'm going to show you later, has a pseudo top chord. Top chords were the first clue that we had that the Incas used a base 10 system, and I'll get into that in a little bit. And then you'll see that there's some chords that are attached to these pendant chords, the chords that hang off the primary chords. Those are called subsidiary chords. And you can have subsidiaries on subsidiaries on subsidiaries. Karen, the lady who deciphered that big khipu, is working on trying to understand what subsidiaries mean. We have some clues and some insights, but we have a long ways to go. You can see that there's knots on these chords. The knots are in registers, hundreds, thousands, hundreds, tens, ones, etc. The chords can be attached to the primary chord in one of 2 ways. You open up the chord and you slide it through like a lark's hitch. For those of you who know a lark's hitch, like a horse. And that it can be done facing you or it can be done away from you. And it turns out that that's a significant sign in khipu reading. And Manny was the one who discovered that it meant moiety information. That's an anthropological term. It has to do with clan affiliation. So the Inca would divide people into Hatun, you've heard that word already, the Bigfoot, right? Hatun and Hanan. And so, meaning upper and lower, or big and small. So if you were Inca, you were big. If you were not Inca, you were a conquered group, you were small. And Manny discovered that the chord attachment signified were you Inca or not Inca. Similarly, the chords have a twist. Tonight you're going to make some chords yourself. So she's going to teach you how. And the chords have a sign. Okay? We call them S because you can see, right, how it matches the S of a letter. You guys are type form. I should have this one. and a Z. So this young gentleman, this dashy man, is Leland Locke. And he was a mathematician and educator in the 20s in Brooklyn. And he got interested in khipus at the Museum of Natural History. And he's our first decipherer. We recently had a khipu gathering. It's been 100 years since he first came out with his first publication, so we had to celebrate. This khipu here, you can see that it has these top chords. And Leland Locke discovered that the nodding sequence on these top chords, when read as an Arabic number, matched the sum of the values that they were attached to, the chords they were attached to. So he was the first person to prove that this was an Arabic numeral system, decimal numeral system that was going on. And he decoded the meaning of the knots in terms of how they were put together. We call it the Lockean typology. So it's groups of single knots, little overhand knots, and then the final knot is called the long knot. You'll see how to do these later. So here are three single knots, and depending on the register, this is in the tens register, if you see three single knots together like this, that means it's 30, okay? If it's in the hundreds register, it would be 300. Okay? You can see an S and a Z knot. Again, that's a sign. These are the knots, so single knots, which are an overhand, like this one. Figure 8 knots, which mean 1. Long knots, these are the long knots. This is from 1 through 9. And I don't know if you're going to teach them long knots tonight. Maybe the advanced students can do long knots. So, and this one has tens of thousands. I've never seen Khipu with tens of thousands. Okay, but thousands, 100s, tens, and ones. All right. So the registers for the numbers. So here we can see a set of chords. So this is 1,000 because it's one single knot. 2, 200. There's nothing here, so that's a 0. And then 5 long knots. So 1, 2, 0, 5, 1,205. Good. I see lots of nodding heads. I'm not going too fast. Okay. So there's a wonderful book written by Michael Code called Breaking the Maya Code. If you're interested in deciphering it, it's fabulous reading. And it talks a lot about the history of decipherment. For me, it was a very inspiring book. It was later on expanded on by Mark Zender. And he says, these are the 5 things you need to decipher a language. These are the 5 pillars on which you can build a decipherment. The first sign, the script typology or the sign inventory, I think we have, after 100 years of studying Khipu, we have a fairly good handle on that. The second one is the corpus. So the Khipu Field Guide database, at this point, we have maybe 670 Khipus in our database. There's about 1,500 Khipus in the world, so there's another 700, 800 left to be digitized. But it's a small database compared to, what ChatGPT is trained on, for example, right? So I'm giving that a frown because the data is messy. There's a lot of digitization errors. Chords are broken, knots are broken, chords are misplaced, Khipus are mounted backwards and read backwards. The data is just a mess. And I spent, there's person years of effort just fixing the data. We go and visit a Khipu and realize it's wrong. We go and see a picture of a Khipu and realize it's wrong, etc. For me, as a decipherer trying to write papers that are academic, it's hard because I can't often prove a hunch statistically because the data is so messy. Okay. So I'm giving that a frown until we get better. The third pillar is language, knowing the language that the script was encoded in. There we have a fairly good idea. The language of the Incas originally was Aymara. They came from Lake Titicaca and moved to Cusco. And then the indigenous language of Tawantinsuyu became Quechua. And the Quechua that they spoke 500 years ago hasn't really changed materially till today. I mean, it's the same language. Now it's more Quechua, no, but it's still Quechua. And it has dialectical differences, but I can understand Quiche, which is Quechua in Ecuador, and I can understand Quechua in Chile when it's spoken. So it may be dialectical, but you gotta get it, okay? So big smiles on language. Cultural context, we have some. We have census documents, we know who the emperors were, etc. So we have some cultural context. Our colleague Dee who studies all of this kind of information, is constantly collecting lists of people and places and names for us to use to mine. And then lastly is a biscript. We do not have a biscript. The closest we came to were those Santa Valley Khipus. And we published, 2 decades of papers on it. And Manny and a colleague of his recently carbon dated those Khipus, only to discover there's about 150-year difference between the Khipus and the census document. So, Groucho glasses for biscripts. We still don't have a good biscript. So sign inventory, I think you got a handle on. This is, if you go to the Khipu Field Guide, you can see this graphic. This kind of condenses everything we know about signs. The dots are actual khipus. The red titles are signs. And then khipus that have a large number of a particular sign, like a large number of S-twist chords or a high chord value, are then linked to these various red title signs, okay? And then the math software goes and it groups these and colorizes them by connectivity and all this. So we find out, for example, using this software, that S knots and Z knots are closely related. So there's some sort of semiotic relationship between them. And similarly, we know that recto chords and verso chords are related. That was that chord attachment that we were talking about that Manning decided what kind of family he belonged to. And down at the bottom in this wonderful drawing is mean chord value. So these are very high chord values, right? In the thousands or maybe 10,000. But they're not connected to anything else. So Manny and I have interpreted that to mean that this is kind of an executive khipu, an executive summary. There's no calculation, no sums. It's just, here's the facts, Mr. Emperor, you know, here's what you owe. This is the Khipu field guide. If you go to khipufieldguide.com, you can take a look at pictures and see what khipu you want to look at. So, Byscript, one of the things that Manny and I worked on together were what he calls paper khipus. So, let's talk about that injustice, the injustices in the book that Guaman de Pomo said. So, Guaman, it was Spanish law that any citizen of the court, any citizen of the empire, excuse me, could petition the court to correct an injustice. He could petition the king. So Guaman de Pomo wrote this book as a petition to the king. It was never read by the king. It was just logged in a library for us to be discovered 500 years later. But people would come into court, they would read their khipus and say, you know, you conquistadors owe me this, and you're not paying me this. And they would read their khipus in court in Quechua. That would be translated into Spanish, and it would be written into the court document. So we discovered 70 of these court documents, 70 of these court readings, and these gentlemen, Marty Parsonen and Yuka Kiviharhu, you know, read all the Spanish and typed it out for us. And Manny and I put that into the database and analyzed it. So the conquistadors were not happy about bringing Khipu to court, right? And calling them out on their claims. So they conspired with the church. And in 1576, 44 years later, the church said, okay, these Khipu are heretical objects. They got the church to declare them heretical. And so that gave permission to the conquistadors to burn all the Khipus they could find and kill all the Khipu Kamaics they could find. And so the Khipus that we have today primarily come from hidden sites, chiefly graves, buried in pots under the earth, etc. The database may not contain a lot of Khipus that were out there just because they were burned, right? And with the killing of the Khipu Kamaics, we lost all the knowledge. So I'm going to show you three kinds of Byscripts, three kinds of paper khipus. These are colored using my software by kind of subject matter. So there's three kinds of subject matter khipus here. The first is a census khipu, right? This village has how many indios, you know, it has how many women, how many widows, etc. So how much are you owed in taxes and labor? Okay. The second one is a count of goods, right? Corn, fanegas, a fanega is a bushel, partridges, fish, etc. So somebody didn't get paid for food, and so they brought this into the court. I don't know what a lot of these are. If anyone knows what a crust is, or a lot of this is like bad Spanish too. It's like Quechua that's been translated to bad Spanish. Anyway, so sometimes it takes me a while to figure it out. The last one's quite fascinating. One of those khipus is a travelogue, and so in the middle of Cusco, there used in what was then called the Cori Cancha. Cori means gold, and Cancha means plaza. So this was the gold plaza, and it literally was a gold plaza full of gold and golden animals and golden sculpture. And in the middle of the plaza was this stone, and it's the Seke stone. Seke is Quechua for line. And so this was like the zip code of the empire, right? And so here, for example, are all the roads that lead from Cusco to Coyasuyu, all the roads that lead from Cusco to Antusuyu, et cetera, et cetera. So unlike roads that lead into Rome in the Inca Empire, they led from Cusco. So you remember Chinchasuyu? You remember that picture of Yupanqui? And so this one talks about Chinchasuyu, and it talks about what the sekes were to this place and how it was important that this was Inca Yupanqui. And because this one place, a huaca, that's a shrine, this one huaca was Inca Yupanqui's, that's where kids were sacrificed because they wanted the Inca Empire to live forever. Okay, this is a schematic rendering of the Khipu that I'm going to show you while you're getting, after you've been instructed on how to make cords and knots, and I'll bring that out. And a few at a time can come up and take a look at it, and I'll show it off to you. But what I wanted to show you, moving back up more, what I wanted to show you was this, which is, this little Khipu shows many of the things that Manny and I discovered in our 5 years together. This is a banded Khipu, so it's a village Khipu. And it has a variant of a top chord known as a pendant loop. You'll see this when we look at the Khipu. And it has all of these sums. So these are the summands that get summed up to the sum total, okay? And I told you that one of the things that we discovered is that while not all sum chords are white, most white chords are sums. And so that's the only color meaning we know for sure. The other kinds of colors we have no verified, what does red mean, what does gold mean, we don't know. But white we know, it probably means a sum, okay? So you can see the sums go in two directions. We have left-handed sums which have their summands, I do it like this, right? The summands and then the sum, and then we have right-handed sums, right? So this one, it sums everything onto this set, and then this set gets summed onto this chord. Okay, and this is a small, simple Khipu, but I've seen ones where the networks are horrendously complex, right? And it takes me a long time to figure it out. And I'm going to hand it off to Saoirse.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.